guess I drove around. Dr. Ian Hudson. Today's date is December 15, 2000, and the time is 9:38. Court reporter will now swear in the witness.
Doctor, raise your right hand, please. You swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
State your name, please, sir.
Dr. Ian Hudson.
And good morning, Dr. Hudson. Again, we spoke before we got on the record, but my name is Andy Vickery. I'm a lawyer from Houston, Texas, actually in Houston, Texas this morning, taking your deposition by telephone. Have you ever had a deposition taken before?
No, I have not.
Okay, sir. What have you done to prepare yourself for this deposition?
Met with counsel during the course of the last few days and discussed various questions.
What materials have you reviewed?
Counsel had provided me with various materials relating to paroxetine.
Do those materials include the aggression study that I have been provided?
Yes.
Do they include the articles, a whole series of them that Mr. Zoloff has sent the abstracts or first pages to me?
I'd need to see which ones you're referring to.
Well, I can kind of go through them in a minute, but did you read a whole series of articles about SSRIs in general and paroxetine in particular with respect to akathisia, suicide, violence, those issues?
I've looked at some articles on those topics, yes.
Dr. Hudson, prior to your preparation for this deposition, had you ever made any attempt to read the scientific literature on whether and to what degree there is an association or causal relationship between SSRIs in general or paroxetine in particular and aggressive or suicidal behavior?
No, I would have delegated that to staff within my department to review that data.
Okay, so this is your first occasion, in other words, getting ready for the deposition, to do that yourself?
To review the literature, yes.
Now, I understand that one of the topics that you are here for today, well, actually, let's be clear about it, that the topics you are here to address are topics 2B and all of topic 5 in my 30B6 notice. Have you gone over that with counsel?
I'd need to see which topics you're referring to.
I'm handing him the designation.
Okay.
And could you restate the sections?
Yes, I've been told you're there to respond to section 2B.
Mm-hmm.
B is in boy, right?
In boy, psychological autopsies on patients who have committed acts of suicide or violence while under the influence of Paxil.
Right.
And are you?
Yes.
Then all of section 5, main topic of section 5 is adverse event reports concerning patients who commit acts of suicide or violence while under the influence of Paxil. And then there are subheadings A through D. Are you there for those purposes?
Yes, I am.
Dr. Hudson, I have reviewed your CV, and I will ask the court reporter to mark a copy of it as Exhibit 1 to this deposition.
It is marked.
Thank you, ma'am. In reviewing your CV, it appears that you did not have any real direct relationship in your practice with psychoactive drugs until such time as you became Worldwide Director of Safety for SmithKline in January of '99. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct.
Since becoming Worldwide Director of Safety in January of 1999, what effect or activities have you had with respect to paroxetine or any other psychoactive drug that is manufactured or marketed by SmithKline Beecham?
Sorry, I'm not sure. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Since January of '99, other than your involvement as a witness in this case, what, if anything, have you had to do with Paxil?
My department is responsible for the collection of adverse events that come in, the serious adverse events and the spontaneous reports and literature reports that come in on Paxil, preparing analyses, whether they be routine periodic safety update reports, US periodics, or whether they be specific analyses on various topics on paroxetine. And so I've had involvement from supervisory and in some cases direct involvement in various topics, safety topics related to Paxil.
Have you, prior to the time that you were named as a witness in this case, ever spent any personal time, not only personal time, but I mean any of your time personally, on the issue of whether there is an association or causal relationship between Paxil and aggression or suicidality?
Yes, during the course of last year and this year, we have prepared documents covering those topics and reviewed data on that, and I have reviewed documents that have been prepared within my department on those.
Now, is one of those documents the aggression study that has been provided to me in draft form by Mr. Ching, or is it Dr. Ching?
I'd like to know which one you're referring to.
I'm referring to a 63-page study. It's been provided to me by Mr. Zola via fax in the last day or two. It's just titled Aggression, Paroxetine Aggression. Are you familiar with that study?
Would you like me to give it to him?
Yes, would you?
Thank you. Yes, this is not a study, this is a review of the data we have, but I'm familiar with this document.
What was the impetus for that document being prepared?
We reviewed the topic of aggression last year. At that time, we said that we would keep aggression under review. In addition, there was considerable noise in the media earlier this year about fluoxetine. So having said that we would keep this topic under review, we re-reviewed this topic this year, and it was also prompted by considerable concern being expressed, considerable noise being expressed in the media. There was a series of articles in The Guardian.
Okay. Now, how about any governmental entity? I mean, was the MCA over in the United Kingdom or the FDA here in any way the impetus for looking into this issue and collecting this information?
No, it wasn't. This was on the basis of internal monitoring.
All right. Is Nicola Ching a doctor?
No, she's a scientist who works within my department.
Did you specifically task her to prepare this report?
I tasked people in my department to prepare this report, and she was delegated the responsibility through her line manager.
All right. I'd like to ask our court reporter to mark that report as exhibit number 2.
It is marked.
Thank you. Dr. Hudson, the copy I have been given says draft. Is it still in draft form?
I'd need to confirm whether it's finally been completed, it had its reviews completed. It was due to be reviewed finally this week and minted at the labelling committee this week, but I haven't had an update as to whether that has happened.
What do you intend to do with the report once it's finalized?
The intentions of, assuming everyone is in agreement that there is no issue here, the intentions would be that this would be stored on file as a record of the review that has been completed.
Do you intend to submit it to any governmental agency?
If a government agency requests information on aggression and paroxetine, we would, but we do not intend to proactively send it to them at this stage. This was an internal review. We do many internal reviews on many topics.
Do you intend to submit it to the peer review process and seek publication of this report in a peer-reviewed journal?
No, we do not.
Why not?
Well, we review many topics on an ongoing basis, and we don't submit them all to publication. This data is a constantly changing source of information. It will be out of date as soon as it were to appear in press. We keep it on file, and if we have cause to review the topic again, we would use it at that stage.
There are folks at Smith-Klein-Beacham who write articles on Paxil that are submitted for peer review and publication, aren't there?
Not from within my department. I believe there may be some others, but others would be more appropriate to address that question to.
Okay. Mr. Pruth, I need a clarification on one thing. The first page of this document is marked confidential. None of the other pages are. Is this a confidential document or not?
It is.
Okay, we will treat it as such.
Thank you.
Dr. Hudson, explain to me, if you would, what the system is whereby SmithKline receives reports of adverse events, how you accumulate the data concerning those reports, and how you investigate them.
Okay. In terms of receipt of adverse events, we will receive reports from many sources, spontaneous reports phoned through to the company or mentioned to sales reps or to other people employed by the company. They will all be sent through to the clinical safety function. These reports will be reviewed by the clinical safety function, will be entered onto a database, and will be assessed by both scientists and physicians involved in the receipt of these cases. There will be then a decision will be made in terms of whether the report meets the requirements for expedite reporting, and if it does, it will be reported accordingly to the regulatory authorities.
All right. What attempt is there on your company's part, first of all, to ascertain whether the reporting doctor, assuming it was a doctor that reported it, believed that the adverse event being reported was caused by Paxil?
Well, in the receipt of a report, we will follow up with the reporter to obtain the relevant information on the case. So we will want to obtain from him the medical history of the patient, whether the patient is on any other medication, etc., whether there are any other circumstances that may have been involved in the event. What's most important to us, however, is the medical history, the circumstances, the whether any other factors involved, rather than whether he thinks that the event was related or not.
So are you telling me that the opinion of the clinician who is treating the patient and who prescribed the Paxil in the first place is not an important consideration?
Well, if he believes that there are other factors relevant, I would hope he would tell us those other factors, and we would certainly ask him about those other factors. So his opinion is relevant in the sense of, are there other factors involved? But regardless of what he thinks, we will record this event, we will analyze this event, and we will deal with it appropriately.
My concern right now, and we'll get into how you deal with it on your end, but my concern right now is the clinical judgment of the doctor who has treated the patient. Is that something that Smith-Klein-Beacham considers important and that it records with respect to such adverse event reporting?
If they tell us their opinion, we will record that on in the narrative of the case.
If they do not volunteer their opinion, do you make any effort to obtain from them their best clinical judgment about whether the drug had any kind of association or causal relationship with the adverse event?
Well, we have a policy that for spontaneous reports and decisions in relation to whether we should be expediting them to the agencies, to assume that in the mind of the reporter there may be some link association between the event and the drug.
So you telling me that if they do not volunteer that information, that's something that you ask them?
No, I didn't say that. I said that for the purposes of our assessment, we assume that in the mind of the reporter, he may be thinking there is some association, otherwise he wouldn't have phoned us up and told us about the event.
Okay, that makes all the sense in the world, I understand. Now, have there been any instances, to your knowledge, in which the physician who reported an adverse event, and specifically an adverse event involving aggression or suicidal thinking or behavior, believed in his or her mind that Paxil had a causal role in that adverse event?
I'd need to review all the individual adverse events to answer. I don't know the details of all the adverse events that have gone into this document. I rely on staff within my department to analyse them in detail.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing that would really require some work on your part or your company's part to decide or diagnose whether or not that's the case.
Correct.
All right. And that information may be more appropriate if obtained by an interrogatory than your deposition. Have there been, what is your policy with respect to making an internal determination of whether Paxil played a causal role in the adverse event that's being reported?
We review cases as they come in. We do not, at that stage, make any internal assessment, except that it will prompt us to do a review if we need to do a review. If the case is such that it raises concerns within the person who's reviewing it, the physician who reviews it, it may well prompt doing a review of the issue.
Okay, but there's no standard policy which requires someone within Smith, Klein, Beecham to ascribe causality or non-causality to the drug?
We don't make an individual causality assessment as per some of the published rating scales, causality assessments on individual drugs as they come in, on individual cases rather.
Do you sometimes do that?
No, our policy is to collect the data and then analyse the data. As I say, if there's a particular event that comes in of concern, it may trigger a review of the issue, but we don't do an individual causality assessment, formal causality assessment on a case-by-case basis for individual cases coming in.
To your knowledge, has there ever been any instance in which an adverse event which involved aggression or suicidal thinking or behavior was determined by someone inside of Smith, Klein, Beecham to be causally related to Paxil?
Not to my knowledge.
And is that situation something like the clinician situation that to really answer that question thoroughly, it would require some determination by others under your supervision?
Well, I've described to you our policy of not making an individual assessment on a case, but rather using a case to trigger a review of a topic if it is of concern to us. So far as I'm aware, and certainly during my time in the clinical safety function, we would not have made an individual causality assessment on any case.
I see. Why not?
Because I don't believe that a single case, particularly these complicated types of cases here, can be used as a basis of a causality assessment. You need to look at pooled data, data from many sources to evaluate whether there are any associations or not.
Well, we're going to have that discussion in a few minutes, but explain to me why, if a reporting doctor who had the clinical encounter
We would review the reported event. We would decide whether there are confounded factors, but the sorts of events that we're talking about here, or perhaps I should ask you to clarify which events we're talking about here, actually.
Talking about aggression and suicidality.
Okay. For those events, these are all multifactorial, complicated events that commonly occur in the type of patients that receive paroxetine. It is not possible to make causality assessments on the basis of case reports such as the ones that we receive.
Okay, let's follow up on that. We all know that there is a certain comorbidity between depression and suicidality, right?
Correct.
And so if someone is depressed and they're getting Paxil, then one suspect for the cause, and they become suicidal, one suspect for the cause of the suicidality is certainly their depression, isn't it?
Correct.
But you also know that it is a multifactorial phenomenon, correct, sir?
Correct. There may be other factors involved.
One of those factors could be biological in nature, couldn't it?
What do you mean by biological in nature?
I mean, I mean something that affected the chemical balance in the person's brain.
We're speculating. I'm not sure that I'm clear what you're referring to.
Dr. Hudson, are you aware of the body of literature concerning the relationship between serotonin and suicide?
In general, I've seen some summary information on that. I've not reviewed that information in detail. I would again delegate that to people within my department and also other psychiatrists within the company who are more closely involved in paroxetine than I am, people such as Dr. Whedon.
Let me just ask you this. Do you know whether or not there is any association between levels of serotonin or the serotonin metabolite, 5-HIAA, and suicidal behavior?
Yes, I believe there is a correlation. I have seen in the literature summary information that implies that there is a correlation between low levels of serotonin or 5-HIAA in patients with suicidal activity.
Which one, serotonin or 5-HIAA?
I believe both have been implicated, but I would repeat what I mentioned before. I have not reviewed this literature in detail.
Okay, so given that you understand that suicide is not only a behavioral phenomenon, but is a biological phenomenon, don't you?
Well, it may be related to the 5-HIAA levels as we've discussed.
And does Paxil lower or raise 5-HIAA levels?
I think that question is best addressed by pharmacology experts rather than myself. I'm not an expert in pharmacology.
Incidentally, is Paxil or paroxetine marketed under the name Paxil in the UK?
It's got a different name in the UK.
What is it?
Seroxat, I think.
How many people are in your particular organization?
Approximately 160.
Right. How many instances are there in which paroxetine or Paxil has been reported to Smith-Kline Beecham to be temporally associated with acts of aggression or suicidality?
Could you clarify what you mean by that, the temporally associated? I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean that a patient becomes homicidal or suicidal within a relatively short period of time from either taking Paxil or getting an increase in dose of Paxil.
You haven't defined what you mean by a relatively short period of time, but I would also have to go back and I don't know the answer to that question. I would need to go back and discuss that with people within my department review the data we have to be able to answer that accurately.
Okay. Do you know what a psychological autopsy is?
I've seen reference to it in some of the literature, but I've not seen it defined.
Okay. And this is a very layman's description, but basically it's an effort after the death of a person to go back and get all the information you can about what might or might not have affected their behavior, particularly in a suicide case. What might or might not have contributed to cause suicide. Can you tell me whether or not Smith-Kline Beecham has ever made a systematic effort to conduct that type of inquiry or investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of people who have committed suicide or murder-suicide while under the influence of Paxil?
I can tell you our policy is to follow up with reporters of events to identify relevant information that may have been involved in that event. So, and we certainly do that because we want to have an understanding of that event, understand the nature of it, whether there are any other circumstances, confounding factors, etc.
Well, let's be very clear about this. You've already told me that your policy does not involve anyone within Smith-Kline Beecham making a determination of whether Paxil played any role in the death or violent behavior of that person, right?
I told you that we didn't do an individual case causality assessment.
Okay. Which is basically what I just said. If you guys do not try internally when this is reported to say, was our drug involved or not, do you?
No, what I said is we don't do an individual case causality assessment. I did say to you we review individual cases and it may trigger a review of the topic if there are events that come in of concern.
We may be miscommunicating. If Mr. Jones in the state of Kansas, commits a murder and then suicide, and his doctor reports it to Smith-Kline Beecham and says, hey, I think this drug may have caused it, does Smith-Kline Beecham make an investigation into the circumstances of Mr. Jones?
Well, what Smith-Kline Beecham will do is go back to the person who reports the case to ask them more information in relation to, this may all come in at the first report, but if it doesn't, we would follow up through the reporter of the case, if it's a healthcare professional, to inquire about further information, to ask about whether there's any medical history, relevant medical history or other drugs involved. So we would follow up on individual cases to identify whether there are other factors involved.
You keep saying to try to identify if there are other factors or confounding factors. And what that suggests to me, with all due respect, sir, is that you're looking for other things to blame other than Paxil.
Objective. Argumentative.
My question to you, Dr. Hudson, is do you try to determine internally whether and to what extent Paxil, jointly with all of the other factors that may or may not be involved, to what extent Paxil may or may not have played a role in Mr. Jones' behavior in this question that I posed to you?
I don't believe you can make a causality assessment based on individual case reports. We certainly do look at cases that come in to understand them from a medical point of view, and see if there's an issue or a signal has arisen from a number of cases that come in. If that was the case, we would certainly go ahead and analyse the data, the complete set of data, to evaluate whether there was any association or issue or not.
So in the hypothesis that I gave you of Mr. Jones, who committed these acts and whose physician believes that Paxil may have been a contributing factor, is it true, sir, that Smith-Kline Beecham would never try to decide one way or the other whether Paxil contributed to that particular
that case as I've described to you. We would then make a determination on the basis of the information we had whether any further investigation in terms of this whole issue was required. If we felt that there was a need to investigate an issue further, we would do an analysis of the issue, pulling in information from a variety of different sources, and then we would be in a much fuller position to be able to answer the question.
Dr. Hudson, I don't want to mince words with you. I'm sorry, my clock is swinging here. But is it true, sir, that you would not try to determine on an individual basis whether Paxil contributed to our mythical Mr. Jones's behavior? Is that true or not?
We would evaluate the case to determine whether other factors were involved or whether this particular case raised a signal. If it did, we would evaluate it further. But as I've said before, it would be impossible to determine on an individual case basis any causality relationship. But we would certainly take all cases reported to us seriously, and we would evaluate them appropriately and follow up as necessary.
Okay, so your view is it's simply impossible for Smith-Klein Beecham to decide whether Paxil did or did not contribute to the homicidal and suicidal behavior of any one given individual. Is that your testimony?
We would certainly gather all the information, but on an individual case basis, it would be impossible to decide whether paroxetine caused an event or not.
Okay. Now, hold on just a minute. I want to, so if you would get Exhibit 2 there, the aggression study. I've lost my page. Bear with me just a second. Okay, would you turn to page 2163? Are you there with me?
Yes.
Now, is it impossible for Smith-Klein Beecham to determine whether the patient identified in the fifth report on the bottom of that page, whether his behavior was caused or was not caused by Paxil?
On an individual case basis, it would be impossible to say whether a drug caused an event.
Okay. Do you know that patient that's reflected down there is the decedent of my client? Is that Donald Shell?
I believe it is, yes.
You're telling me, say, under oath, it's simply impossible for Smith-Klein Beecham to decide whether Paxil did or did not cause Mr. Shell to murder his wife, his daughter, his granddaughter, and then to commit suicide. Is that right, sir?
It is impossible on an individual case basis from individual reports to assign causality, especially in a very complicated area such as this. That's why when we have issues, we review all the available data and make a determination on the basis of all the available data whether there is an issue or not.
Okay. Do you believe that it is possible that Paxil has caused any person worldwide to commit an act of homicide or suicide?
Objective form.
I have seen no evidence to suggest data in detail. Once we review the data in detail, we'll see if there are any issues, whether there's any association, and I'm telling you that my conclusions are that I have seen no data at all to suggest that on an individual case basis there's any causal association between paroxetine and an event.
Do your adverse event report include specific boxes for the people making the report to say whether or not whatever adverse event was happening abated when the drug was removed, or whether it reappeared when the person was re-challenged with the drug?
We would record that information in the narrative.
Why?
Sorry? Did you say why or fine?
I said why?
Why? Because, as I've described, we try to characterize the cases as fully as possible.
Well, if a person has an adverse event, that adverse event goes away when the drug is removed, is that subjective to you that the drug may have caused the adverse event?
No, not necessarily.
It's so necessary.
No.
For example, does it suggest to you that the drug might be causing the event?
No. There are many other factors involved.
And when in fact the person was being re-challenged with the drug and the adverse event reappeared, does that suggest to you that the drug may cause that?
No, again, there are many other factors involved.
So how do you always prove or disprove whether the drug causes any adverse event? How do you do that?
There are a number of ways of doing that. There are no randomized studies, there are populations of one way, nothing else to suggest that any
Let's talk about the first issue you state, randomized clinical trials. Okay? Do you believe then that counseling has a beneficial effect on suicidal thinking for the patient?
Yes, those are the things that suggest exactly the case.
All right. So when we're sitting in, let's just hypothetically assuming 100 patients, and they all of a sudden will have thinking about suicide, about drugs or something like that. Just say if we've got 100 patients that all of a sudden have relapsed or actively thinking about suicide, is it your belief that if you go to Paxil to all of those 100 people, the clinical study would have a less of their suicidal thoughts?
Clinical trial data shows that patients who receive paroxetine are likely to achieve suicidal ideation.
Are you willing to test the premise whether we get that or right? Now, what if 5 of the 20 got better, but the one person of the 80 that was not even thinking about suicide actually became suicidal and committed suicide? Would statistical analysis suggest that that person, you should be cheering for that person? What I'm really asking is this: is it true that this drug helps suicidal thinking? And this, quite frankly, I think is true in some people. But it is also true that in a smaller number of people, it precipitates suicidal acts. Then that smaller number gets masked in the figures of the other ones, don't they?
Objective point, assuming that's not relevant.
May I answer my question?
I'm not aware of any data that suggests that patients will be precipitated. I think your word was precipitated. I'm not aware of any data that suggests any patients will be precipitated into suicidal ideation. Quite the contrary, the analysis that we have done, where we have taken patients without any suicidal ideation at baseline using the HAM-D score, this is a meta-analysis across trials, has shown no increase in suicidal ideation in these patients compared to placebo. and indeed the other way around, there's a statistically significant improvement for those patients who had a HAM-D of 0.
Dr. Hudson, you're quibbling with my hypo. The question is whether or not the experience of that one person would show up in the data. That's the real question. Would it show up in the data, or would it be hidden by the beneficial effect on the other patient?
I'm not sure I really understand the question you're asking. I mean, certainly we would report all the data from the trial, so there'd be no question of the information not being available.
Okay, well, if you're not sure you understand it, let me go on to something else. Do you know of any reason why Smith Klein Beecham did not do psychological autopsies? I'm not talking about just kind of gathering the information about other things you could blame, but I'm talking about complete psychological autopsies on patients who his physicians or others have reported their suicidal or aggressive behavior in temporal association with Paxil. Is there any reason why you could not do psychological autopsies on those patients?
Well, objective point, I think it's mischaracterizing his testimony as to what is done when cases are reported.
You may answer my question, sir.
I've described to you what we do. We do go back to the reporter to inquire about further information to ensure that we do gather information, other relevant information about the case.
But what you told me in about 4 different answers is you're looking for other factors that could be involved, for confounding factors, but that you never seek to determine whether Paxil contributed to it. And my only question is, could you do so if you wanted to?
Well, we do evaluate a case. I'm describing to you what my previous answers, but we do evaluate cases to identify if there are other factors involved or whether we need to investigate the subject further. So we certainly do go back to the reporter if he's a healthcare professional and ask relevant questions.
Okay, let me follow up on that. If you find that there are other factors involved, do you then say, well, we don't need to investigate further?
Well, we continue to review all topics on a regular basis. We write 6-monthly periodic safety update reports on all compounds, including paroxetine. So we do, on a regular basis, review all the data coming in and decide whether any further action is required.
Okay. Let me change gears on you a minute. Do y'all report the adverse event information in terms of patient years?
Sorry, could you rephrase the question?
Is your reporting kept in terms of patient years? In other words, when you report the incidence or rate of adverse events, do you report it in patient year terms?
Which safety information are you referring to?
Adverse events associated with Paxil.
But from what source?
From any source.
Well, some is presented based on just the figures that come in. Some, I think, sometimes clinical trial data is presented in terms of patient event years. No, patient exposure years, sorry.
Now, if there is an adverse event, and that adverse event typically occurs very early on, and the reporting of the company is done in terms of overall patient years, does that accurately demonstrate the adverse event?
I don't think I understand your question. I don't understand what you mean by early on.
Well,
my group typically do not present the information in terms of patient years. I've certainly seen in the past some information from clinical trials presented both ways. It's presented both in terms of absolute numbers and also in terms of patient years. So the information is there for the reviewer to see.
Okay. Dr. Hudson, does Paxil have an association with akathisia?
I've seen some case reports of akathisia. I'm aware that there have been some cases of akathisia, so it is something that we have received case reports about.
Do you believe, as Worldwide Safety Director of Smith Beecham, that Paxil causes some patients to become akathisic?
I've seen no evidence to suggest a cause and effect relationship between paroxetine and akathisia. I've seen some case reports, but I've seen nothing that suggests a cause and effect relationship.
Has Smith Beecham ever funded either a large-scale clinical trial or an epidemiological trial to prove, one way or the other, whether there's a cause and effect relationship between Paxil and akathisia?
The Smith Beecham has conducted many studies on paroxetine that will include the gathering of safety information, and so safety information relevant to that may have been included in those.
Dr. Hudson, do you know what a primary outcome measure is?
Could you define it for me?
Sure. The principal main thing that you're trying to decide when you conduct a study.
Right.
Hypothesis. You know what that is, don't you?
Primary hypothesis.
Has Smith Beecham ever conducted a study, either a randomized clinical trial or large-scale epidemiological trial, where the principal hypothesis being studied was this drug either causes or does not cause akathisia?
I'm not aware of any such study, but again, all the studies that have been conducted and all the way that we gather the safety information will gather information on cases of akathisia if they are reported. So we will gather that information through a variety of other sources.
Has Smith Beecham ever conducted a large-scale clinical study or epidemiological study where the principal hypothesis being tested was this drug either causes or does not cause suicide?
We have looked at suicide through a number of different tools that are available to us to identify, to address that question.
But have you conducted a large-scale study where the principal hypothesis being tested was the drug causes or does not cause suicide?
Again, we have evaluated this through a number of different tools. If you're asking whether we've conducted a randomized prospective study, that is an inappropriate way to study the issue. We believe we've studied this issue in an entirely appropriate way.
Okay. Have you ever done a re-challenge test?
For what?
Re-challenge study to look into the issue of whether Paxil causes or does not cause suicide.
I think there'd be considerable ethical issues there. All the data that's available that we have seen suggests that Paxil reduces suicidal ideation, not the other way around. So I think there'd be considerable ethical concerns here.
Are you aware of the fact that Eli Lilly and Company designed such a re-challenge study and actually submitted the protocol to the FDA? Are you aware of that?
No, I've not seen that. Not seen that study.
All right. Are you aware of the fact that the one of the people that assisted in the design of that study was Dr. Wheaton, who's now at Smith Beecham?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
Has Smith Beecham ever tried in a systematic way to look into the modality of death of people who commit suicide while on Paxil?
The reviews of suicide that have been done on Paxil have evaluated the mode of death. That's correct.
is it true, sir, that most of the people who have committed suicide while taking Paxil have done so in a violent way?
No, I'm not aware of data showing that. I would need to go back and have a look to answer that question.
Okay. Are you familiar with a concept in epidemiological studies dealing with the power of the study to measure or determine whatever it is the study is looking for?
Yes.
Kind of explain that in layman's terms for us. What does power mean when you're talking about an epidemiological study?
I can define, my understanding of power refers more to randomized clinical studies.
Okay. Well, tell me then what's your understanding of it in that context?
The ability of the study to confirm or reject the hypothesis.
If the hypothesis is one that involves a rare effect, whether it's beneficial or adverse, does it take a lot more people to have sufficient power to prove or disprove the relationship of the drug to that effect?
I'd need to see the specific example you're talking about and the difference that you're expecting to see.
Just as a general proposition, if you're looking for something that only happens, say, in 3 to 5% of the population, you'd have to have a whole bunch of people to prove that the drug caused or didn't cause that event, wouldn't you?
You may have to go to other tools, like studying a meta-analysis across studies, that sort of thing. It may be an impossible question to answer by a simple randomized study, so you may have to use other tools.
Okay. Go back to Exhibit 2 for a minute, the aggression study. Prior to that study being done, did you have any understanding of the phenomenon described there called neuroleptic-induced akathisia?
I've seen reference to it in the literature. I've not studied it in detail.
Okay. Do you know whether or not the diagnosis of neuroleptic-induced akathisia under the DSM-IV requires proof of both objective manifestations of motor movements as well as a subjective feeling of inner restlessness?
I would need to check the definition in DSM-IV to answer your question. I can't recall the exact wording, but I do recall there are elements of subjective and objective restlessness, but exactly the wording I can't recall.
Okay. Dr. Hudson, in the materials that were provided to me, one of the articles that you read was an article by Dr. Lane
Right.
called SSRI-induced extrapyramidal symptoms and akathisia. Do you recall that article?
Yes, I'd like to review it again if you would like to ask me detailed questions on it.
Mr. Anderson, do you have that article there?
I'm not sure I do. I'll check. Why don't we take a break?
Okay, let's all take a 5-minute break and go to the men's room or whatever, and see if you can locate that one.
Okay, I'm going to put you on mute, and then I'll come back on in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Going off the video record, time is 10:32. Back on the video record, the time is 10:44.
Dr. Hudson, over the break, were you able to locate the Lane article?
Yes, I've got a copy in front of me.
Is that an article that you read in preparation for this deposition today?
I've looked through it briefly in the past, yes.
Was it chosen by you or selected by someone else for you to read?
It was sent to me by counsel.
Right. Do you see that the author of the article, Dr. Lane, is an employee of Pfizer?
Yes, I do.
Pfizer's interest with regard to the question of SSRI-induced suicidality or violence are certainly the same as your company, don't they?
Sorry, could you rephrase that question?
Yeah, Pfizer has the same interest with respect to this question of whether SSRI drugs as a class cause violence or suicide as your company has, don't they?
Object to form.
I can't talk for Pfizer.
But don't you know that all of the SSRI drug manufacturers are interested in, it's not disproving that these drugs cause violence or suicide, at least keeping people from proving that?
Well, objective to form.
You can answer my question, Doctor.
I can't speak for any other company. All I can talk about is our approach, which is to evaluate data that comes in an open and fair manner to decide what we believe it shows us.
Okay. In the materials that were provided to me, there was also an abstract of a recent article by Dr. David Healy. Do you know Dr. Healy, either personally or by reputation?
I don't know him personally. I've heard of Dr. Healy.
In what context have you heard of him?
I've seen a manuscript that he has written, which has been forwarded to me.
You mean that things that were actually published or manuscripts that
No.
were under review?
No, published material. And I've seen his name also in media reports as well.
So have you made a systematic effort to read his manuscripts, or just read them whenever they happen to come across your desk?
I've read manuscripts that have been given to me for the purpose of preparation for this deposition.
Have you ever read any expert witness report or deposition of Dr. Healy?
I have seen a document. Not quite sure the nature of the document that describes his position on SSRIs. I'm not sure I know exactly the nature of it. It may have been a statement.
Okay. Well, Doctor, let me ask you this. I assume that if we go to trial in this case in Wyoming or in any other case in the United States, if SmithKline Beecham asks you to come and testify live, you will do so, won't you?
Well, SmithKline Beecham will have to decide who its most appropriate witnesses are to be. I will be leaving the company at the end of the year because I'm taking up another appointment at the Medicines Control Agency in the UK.
Ah, okay. But not until, what was this, at the end of this year?
Correct.
I see. Incidentally, is SmithKline going to implement the new suicide warning that the Medicine Control Agency in the UK recommended back in August of this year?
Could you refer to or tell me exactly what the warning is?
It's a warning concerning suicide. Suicide and Paxil. Have you seen it?
Well, SmithKline Beecham and the MCA have been in discussion in relation to including some wording within the UK data sheet. Exactly what the final wording will be, I don't know. I have not seen. I would need to consult my colleagues on that.
But is SmithKline Beecham going to implement a wording change with respect to the issue of suicide on the Paxil label sometime in the near future?
We've certainly been in discussion with the MCA about that. I'm not sure whether that's finally resolved and when that's going to happen.
Do you know that the MCA recommended that there be a wording change?
I'm aware that last year the MCA wrote to SmithKline Beecham asking the company to include a comment in relation to suicide, that the risk doesn't disappear on the start of treatment. I would need to go back to the files to see exactly what the wording was.
Okay. What will be your position at the MCA?
I'll be director of the licensing division at the Medicines Control Agency.
What will be the general nature of your functional responsibilities there?
The Medicines Control Agency has a licensing division and a post-licensing division and a number of other divisions such as enforcement, finance, etc. The licensing division is responsible for the technical review of license applications. So we'll be working with the Committee on Safety of Medicines and the European Medicines Evaluation Agency, doing technical assessments on new applications, clinical trial approvals, things like that.
Is the licensing division responsible for the verbiage, whether warnings or other verbiage on the label for paroxetine in the UK?
The post-licensing division will deal with marketed drugs. The licensing division will deal with things up to first approval.
Okay, so you will not have any role at the licensing division with respect to any warning that is or is not implemented on paroxetine's label in the UK. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, sir. I will pass the witness, gentlemen.
No questions?
Going off the video record, the time is 10:51. This concludes today's videotape deposition.